Hey everyone, welcome to today's podcast episode. I'm your host, Matthew Lilley, and I'm excited to have special guest Aaron Custalow with us today. He's been doing amazing things over the last few years, reaching Gen Z, reaching the nations with the gospel of Jesus. He's got some incredible stories and testimonies and encouragement for you guys today about what God's doing. Before I introduce Aaron and invite him in, I just want to welcome those of you who are part of the Presence Pioneers podcast community. Thank you for engaging with us. Thank you for following, subscribing, sharing, commenting, all the good things you do to give us feedback and participate with us. We really appreciate that. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, if you can leave us a rating, that really helps out a lot. And if you're new to the podcast, welcome. We want to help you to experience more of God's presence and to host God's presence in your life and in your community, because we believe God's presence changes everything. Aaron, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Matt. I'm excited to be on today.
Yeah, it's great to have you, man. We kind of crossed paths a couple of times over the years in different contexts, and I
Yes.
think first met when you were up in Virginia. I'm down here in North Carolina. And I think you might have even come down to North Carolina at one point, maybe. But yeah, just wanted to reach out to you and have you on today. I know you've been involved in a number of different things in ministries over the years, and wanted to just get to know you, introduce you to the podcast community here. And so take a few minutes, just kind of give a quick introduction, who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks, Matt. I'm Aaron Custalow. I currently am serving at a missions organization, House of Prayer, called MAPS Global, that's located in Richmond, Virginia. So my wife and I are both staff and leaders here, serving, and I am the director of mobilization. So that's what I have the joy of doing right now, which is super fun. I get to mobilize, especially young people, to consider giving their lives for the worth of Jesus in the nations, and building day and night prayer across the 1040 window. So anyways, that's what I'm up to right now. But like you said, when we met, I was up in Fredericksburg running with some incredible friends, David Bradshaw and Randy Martinez, a bunch of crew. Maybe they've been on this podcast before, maybe not, but
They have, both of them have, yeah.
yeah, totally, yeah, with a ministry called Awaken the Dawn. And so I hail from Fredericksburg, Virginia. I went out and a couple years ago lived in Dallas, Texas for a hot second, or for about a year and a half. We moved our family out there because we had launched an initiative called Gen Z for Jesus that was really birthed out of doing Jesus clubs in high schools. And because I was a youth pastor for about 10 years and then began training students, going into high schools, preaching the gospel, and kind of birthed this initiative called Gen Z for Jesus. And we felt the Lord inviting us to move out to Texas to link arms with One Voice and Brian Barcelona, who's a dear friend of mine, which I was already serving with doing Jesus clubs in high schools. And so we moved out to Texas with the One Voice squad for about a year and a half, got to be at Upper Room as our church home. And actually Upper Room jumped in as a collaborator with Gen Z for Jesus, which is amazing. And then after about a year and a half, felt the Lord drawing us back to Richmond, Virginia, to kind of rejoin with MAPS Global, because I had been with MAPS Global, but to kind of rejoin. And I'd spent about a decade in youth ministry, mobilizing youth to reach high schools and to to pray in high schools. And so felt the Lord inviting us to continue doing that, but mobilizing young people for a student volunteer missions movement to the nation. So that's kind of what brought us to MAPS Global for this time, still mobilizing young people to preach the gospel, so mobilizing them to pray, but now also mobilizing them to go to the nations and unreached. So it's super fun. But anyways, that's a little bit about me and what me and my family have been up to.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I'd love to get into some of your journey even more so, and because I
Cool.
think there's just the way God drew you into some of these things. So there's even some supernatural elements to it. I know,
Yeah.
as there are for many of our journeys into ministry and into the assignments God's given us. But maybe take us back. How did you get? I know you were in a house of prayer in Fredericksburg, Virginia, but then God sort of led you into this, student ministry, outreach to the high schools, that kind of thing. Maybe you could start there, or you may want to go back even earlier, but like, how did you kind of get into this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I was on staff. Well, the whole story about how I got to the house of prayer is a long one, but a fun one too. But
Sure.
basically, the Lord gripped my heart. I was in college. I was in a
Mm.
metal band, and we were touring bars and clubs, preaching the gospel,
Yeah, you're a
seeing people
drummer,
get
right?
saved. Yeah, I'm a drummer. Seeing people get saved, healed, delivered, while we were just ministering to the Lord
Mm.
with metal music, which was really interesting. But that literally, we played every show vertically
Mm.
to the Lord. It was offering our incense to Him, and in the
Was this
midst
like
of
early
that,
mid 2000s
yeah, this is
when there
like
was kind of a scene?
2007,
Okay,
2008.
okay, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I began to fall in love with Jesus more, but with ministering to Him on my
Mm.
instrument, and then seeing the way that He would show up and minister to people in the context of prayer and worship. And so, anyways, that kind of was my doorway into the house of prayer. I was like, man, I want to minister to the Lord on my instrument day and
Yeah.
night. I want to continue to see God touch people's lives in His presence. And so anyway, so I joined the House of Prayer in Fredericksburg, which at that time was called the Fredericksburg Prayer Furnace, which was the OG title, and an incredible crew of people, so much fun. I met my wife there, but I became the youth pastor of that House of Prayer and church community, and and kind of fast forwarding, got to do incredible stuff, youth camps. Man, the Lord just would show up in crazy, powerful ways. But fast forward to 2000s, I say there was two key encounters, one in 2014, one in 2015.
Mm.
The encounter in 2014, I was actually in northern Iraq with Maps Global, doing 50 hours of prayer because ISIS had just invaded and come across the Syrian border, and they were killing Christians, kicking people out of homes, and it was a mess. And we flew in with a small team to run 50 hours of nonstop prayer with mostly refugees and a couple local missionaries that hadn't left because most had, and a few local pastors that hadn't left because most had. And
Mm.
and the room was full day and night of mostly young people, which I was shocked. And most of these young people a lot of them had lost their parents. They were sharing stories of ISIS beheaded our mom, our dad, or they captured my mom. Just horrific
Mm.
stories. But yet here they are. They found a home in God's presence in this little church building where we did day and night prayer, and they were getting encountered and filled with joy. And I was like, Lord, what is going on? And I had an encounter there where the Lord basically spoke to me that compassion for teenagers was going to be a key to the Middle East. And I
Wow.
was like, compassion for teenagers, like what? And so anyways, then we find out on that trip that actually teenagers have one of the widest open doors for the gospel in the Muslim world,
Hmm.
because it is illegal for adults to proselytize or evangelize minors. But if you are a minor, it's actually culturally acceptable, even in Muslim culture, that those underage can share their faith, even if it's contrary to Islam. They're like protected.
Interesting.
And so anyway, so I was like, oh my gosh. Anyway, a couple years later, we brought a team of youth back to northern Iraq, preached the gospel, had these 16 and 17-year-olds leading worship, preaching the gospel. God moved in crazy ways. But anyway, that encounter in northern Iraq, and that even phrase, compassion for teenagers, would be a door for the Middle East for the gospel, really marked me for saying yes to Jesus, to believe for a student awakening that would result in a student volunteer movement. And so anyways, that's 2014 that happens. Then in 2015, had gone through a rough patch. I was burnt out. I was getting super stoked for missions and a little less stoked for youth group. I was like, man, all these moms are always complaining about the snacks we serve at youth group aren't healthy, or they didn't like what I preached on, or the kids didn't like the games, and I was just getting a little bit burnt out, but really what it was is my heart was closing up. My heart I was disconnected from God's heart of compassion for young people. And so anyways, I told David Bradshaw at the time, who was my boss, and I was like, David, I don't think I can keep being the youth pastor. Like, can we start looking for a replacement? I'm lit up for missions. I want to, focus on the nations. Yeah. And so I'm preparing in that mode. And then about 9 months go by and no replacement has been found, and I'm like, I can't keep doing this half-hearted. Like, I'm feeling my heart colder than ever towards young people. And I was just like, I can't keep doing this. I've got to train. I've just got to give them a hard deadline that I'm quitting. And so I tell David, I was like, I'll lead this summer's youth camp, but then I'm done. And so anyways, fast forward to the youth camp to August 2015. Camp goes great. It's awesome. We're on the last day of camp, and I'm planning on preaching a session on identity, on like gender identity, identity of sons and daughters, all that kind of stuff. And
you got to watch out for those last days of youth camp, man. They'll get
totally,
you.
Dude, they'll get you. They'll get you. And
I've had an encounter with God when I was young on the last day of youth camp, so it changed my life.
Yeah. To all you guys listening, go attend the last day of a youth camp somewhere. God's going to show up. But the Lord whispers to me, and he's like, hey, just preach the gospel. And I was like, okay. And so I just share the gospel with the youth camp, and they had been hearing it all week, so it wasn't even that new. But kids just started repenting and turning to the Lord. And all of a sudden, it was like God himself was in the room. And it was hard to explain, but we say, hey, everybody that's giving your life to the Lord, whoever wants to be filled with the Holy Spirit, stand up. And almost the whole room's on their feet at this point. And this is a small room, mind you. This is like 50 kids packed into a small classroom. Not a huge flashy youth camp, Right. There was no band, no lights, we were literally just in a classroom with the ceiling lights on, packed in, sitting on the floor. And there's this one girl, and she had never been to church, barely ever read her Bible, had never been to a youth camp. She gave her life to the Lord, and she had stood up. And before I could even get down the line to like pray for her, I see her all of a sudden just go, whoa, just like she got hit with 1,000 volts of electricity when no one's even praying for her. And I'm like, what is going on? And so I'm like, I grab a couple of our leaders and I'm like, hey, why don't you take her out and pray for her? Because I'm thinking if somebody is going to manifest or needs, deliverance from the demonic or whatever, like now would be the time, and so they pull her out, and I'm like, all right, they're going to, love on her and walk her through whatever healing and deliverance she needs, in this moment. This is awesome. And we keep praying for kids, and the presence of God is just increasing and increasing. And then all of a sudden they bring this girl back into the room like 60 seconds later. And I'm like, why is she back already? And the girl opens up her mouth. Sorry. And she tells us what she saw. Is she said, I was standing in line waiting for prayer when all of a sudden I saw Jesus walk through the door of the classroom, walk down the line to me, and put his hand on me. And that's when the 1,000 volts of electricity, she just gets fried. And as soon as she tells the room this, it was like another realm of glory opened up, and kids begin to weep and cry. And all of a sudden, all kinds of kids start having open encounters where they're seeing Jesus, they're feeling a hand on them when no one's praying for them. It got scary. And I don't know what the tone of the podcast is. We don't build our life on wild encounters necessarily. Sure. I mean, everything is, we base it on the Bible, the scriptures, the word of God. But this was a moment in God's presence where he was in the room. And funny enough, Matt, I go and I take a seat in the back corner of the room at this point because I'm mad. I'm like, God, you're going to show up like this on my last day. Like, right. I've been a youth pastor for years. I've prayed so many times for you to, Jesus, just walk into the room, And like now on my last day when I'm quitting, you actually walk into the room. Like, what am I supposed to do with this, God? And so I'm mad. And so I'm sitting arms crossed in a chair along the back wall of the room. Kids are probably wondering, like, why isn't he praying for us? Right. But I was just upset. And then all of a sudden, it's like, when you go to the doctor and they hit your knee with the little boing, to do the reflex test, It was all of a sudden like this reflex just hits me. And I can't control it. And I jump to my feet and I start screaming at the top of my lungs what God's doing in this room, he wants to do in high schools all across America. What God's doing in this room, he wants to do in high schools all across the nation. And meanwhile, in my mind, I'm like, what am I even saying? Like, I don't even believe this. Like, why am I shouting? And anyways, fast forward. We're in this encounter for about 2 hours of weeping, intercession. Kids start feeling calls to the nations. They start, travailing for different nations, and so then I was just like, let's dismiss all the kids, send them to the prayer room to journal about what just happened, because I don't know what else to do. How do you end a moment like that, And so they go to the prayer room. And I'm left alone in this room. I just stayed back in the classroom. And I just laid on the floor and I just wept. Because I was just like, Jesus, I don't know what to do with this, And then all of a sudden, as I'm laying there, I hope it's okay to tell swirly
This
stories.
Is great. No, it's wonderful.
But I'm laying on the ground, and all of a sudden, it was like 1,000 pounds of weight just fall onto my body and begin to drive me into the floor, is what it felt like. And I can't breathe. And I can suddenly, it was a vision, but it was like I could see it. Suddenly I could see through my eyelids into the room where I was. And I could see these 2 blazing golden feet right in front of my face, where I'm laying. And I am terrified. And I start trying to get the words out, Jesus, don't kill me. That's what I was trying to say. Because I instantly knew my heart has not been connected to his heart. I am not in a good place right now. I was terrified. And so I'm trying to get the words out, Jesus, don't kill me, but I can't say anything. And then I just hear this whisper to my heart as he's standing there. I hear him say, Aaron, go to the high schools. And then I in my heart, because I can't even speak, in my heart I say yes. And then the weight lifts, I can breathe, and I just cry and cry and cry on the floor, and the Lord begins to reveal to me how hardened my heart had got, that how how little of his compassion for young people I had. And I felt that day like a real exchange, like a hard heart got taken out. I felt like a rock leave my chest, and a tender heart towards young people put in. And so I said yes, and I got up off the floor and went and told my wife, and she was like, "Yeah, I knew you shouldn't have been quitting," you know.
Of course.
So I always joke. I always tell people, because people are always like, "Whoa, that's such a crazy encounter. God encountered you," and I'm like, "Really? That was the mercy of God because I wasn't listening to my wife." Because she the whole time was like, "Why are you quitting youth ministry?" You know,
That's
and
hilarious.
if I just listened to my wife, it probably would have gone better for me. But
It's a good word. That's a word for somebody right there.
hey, that's a word. Take it. But I leave this encounter. I'm like, okay. So I decide not to quit, and I'm like, I'm gonna stick with the youth group, and I'm gonna start. And it's funny because I had talked with Brian Barcelona from One Voice and the Jesus Clubs before, and he was like, "Dude, do you want to be the East Coast guy for One Voice and Jesus Clubs?" And I was like, "Nah, no thanks." And that was like a year prior. And so when after this encounter, I was like, I just knew I needed to call Brian back and be like, "Hey man, I'm gonna go after high schools. Like the Lord told me, I need to go after high schools."
Yeah.
And so I call him. I connect with Jesus Clubs, and we start praying. Is one of the artists in our prayer room takes this old door, like out of a renovation that had gotten ripped out of a house, paints the door all artistic, and paints the name of every high school in our region on the door, and puts the door in the prayer room. And so every day we would go stand at this door, and we would pray Colossians chapter 4, verse 2. We would pray for an open door for the gospel. And at this door in the prayer room. And honestly, I was expecting after this power encounter with Jesus, I was thinking like, I'm going to walk onto a high school, like first week of school, and it's going to be revival is game on, you know? And it wasn't. It was about 2 years later before I ever saw a door budge. And so the first 2 years after that encounter was just prayer. It was actually almost 3 years, actually. It was almost 3 years. It was 2.5 years that it was just praying for an open door, going and knocking on the doors of high schools and getting a no. Every kid, I was like, "Hey, let's go reach your high school." You know, like it just didn't work out. And I was like frustrated, trying to make it happen in my own strength and all that. And when one day, this one girl who got also touched at our youth camp and got a heart for her high school, she decided, "I want to do this." And she spent a year and a half trying to find a teacher sponsor. She finally found one, and we launched the very first Jesus Club in Virginia. And on February, oh man, I forget the exact date. I should know the exact date. But anyways, the date is significant because we had been praying, we had been waiting, and at the right time, God opened the door. And that morning when I show up on the campus, my phone buzzes with the news that Billy Graham just that morning had died. And, which was significant to our community because we had been praying and believing a prophetic word that when Billy Graham passed, that a fresh grace for evangelism was going to come on the next generation.
Yeah.
And so I feel a shot of faith in my heart. You know, stepping onto this campus, we've been praying for years, nothing budged, and now here we are, our very first open door, and Billy Graham had just passed away. And I just had this moment with God where I was like, "Lord, I'm going to go all in, and I'm going to believe for many to be saved." You know, because I had been praying small prayers, which are great. I had been praying, "God, if you save just one through all of this, if you save just one kid, it'll be worth it." And it would have been. But the Lord challenged me of like, "Aaron, do you have faith to believe with me for more than one?" And so anyways, that morning we opened up the Jesus Club at a little podunk high school out in the boonies of Virginia, and 300 kids show up, and about 130 of them responded to the gospel to give their life to Jesus, the very first day. And I was blown away. News started spreading across school districts. We began to come back every week to do Jesus Club. We began seeing kids get healed. We wouldn't even lay hands on them. We were just preaching the gospel, and kids sitting in their seats in the auditorium would get healed of various ailments and different things. We would sometimes at Jesus Club just stand up and give words of knowledge and pray for healing. We saw all kinds of just wild stuff.
Yeah.
And it was all in this place of like the Lord had lingered the process out so that I could connect to his heart of like actually wanting to carry something that was on his heart for these youth, Yeah. And then he had to let me wait a couple years to break me. And so anyways, man, we did baptisms on this public school campus, which was crazy. I remember one kid had cuts on his hand, and we dunked him in the water. And when he came up out of the water, he had no cuts on his hand.
Come on.
And just story after story, like it made the news. They reported it. The article went all over. I heard news of like pastors' conferences of like the whole Foursquare denomination had a pastors' conference, and they showed our news article at the pastors' conference because they were like, God's still moving on campuses. And I'm like, what? And so, anyways, it was cool because some legal groups reached out and tried to file a lawsuit against us. And the crazy awesome thing is they threw out the case because everything that we were doing was legal, because we were empowering students.
Right.
It wasn't just, our show. It was, we were empowering young people to pray. We were empowering young people to fast. We were empowering young people to preach the gospel, and be leaders on their campus. And so anyways, there are just all kinds of wild stories across high schools. And, and
so we're coming up here probably need to wrap up this first half. This is an amazing story. I remember when Billy Graham died, and actually we were hosting a conference down here in North Carolina that David came to like that weekend, whatever the weekend was, because I remember he shared that story. It was fresh at that time that it just happened that week. And he came down here for a conference with us that weekend, and it was a very significant weekend and kind of time period for us here as well, because of just the anticipation of that, not the anticipation Billy Graham would die, but just the anticipation of what God would do after that, in light of some of the prophetic words and that kind of thing. So, man, this is amazing. I just want to leave people with a couple things here. Number one, listen to your wife.
That's right.
Number two, I mean, the fact that you prayed for a couple years, like God spoke to you, but then you didn't see the manifestation of that for a few years, and you and your community held on to what God had spoken, and you prayed faithfully, and then eventually God started to open the door. I think that's just an encouragement to all of us to stay in the place of faith. If God's spoken, he will do what he said he's going to do. And we can't force it in our own strength, but we can partner with him in prayer and hold on to those promises that he's spoken until we see those things fulfilled. And then it was just one girl. I think that Jesus talked about, when he sent his disciples out, he said to find the person of peace, and that was sort of what that person would be the open door to more people. And so I think of that. Who's that one person? Who's that person of peace that we can connect with, that we can minister to, and that could open a door to more. So anyway, those are some things I kind of took away from your story there, Aaron. Man, it's so good. I want to encourage people to check out the second part. Aaron and I are going to continue this conversation, and I'm going to ask him kind of how that phrase, compassion for teenagers, is a key to the Middle East. Like I want to dig into that some. What what does what God's doing in Gen Z and high schools have to do with what God's doing in the nations? Because that's not immediately clear, but I think there's a connection there. And then I want to just ask him about how all of us who are maybe not students, not Gen Z, not young people, how can we minister? How can we connect? How can we be a part of what God's doing among young people, among Gen Z, and among students? And so I'm going to ask some of those questions to Aaron in the second half. And if you want to listen to that, just click the link in the description. We offer it on Presence Pioneers Premium, which is our subscriber community. And if you want to go deeper with us, you can join Presence Pioneers Premium. And we send out bonus episodes. We do early releases. You can comment and engage just kind of in a deeper way with us. And it just allows us to fund the podcast and help produce this content and these resources for you guys. So Aaron, this was amazing. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matt.